Alright, this is turn 21 of I equipped my heavy crossbow. Just to take a look at the battle, which I'm sure that many of you were anticipating, it doesn't actually happen. So Marignon decided to leave his army in the fort, because he didn't think that it was large enough to fight me. And instead he sent out the solo commander with a Rhyme Hauberk, presumably because he thought that, I don't know, it could beat a small amount of units or something. But since I have my whole whopping big army here fighting it, yeah. So I managed to kill one of my own heavy cavalry guys with heavy fire, with a bunch of heavy crossbow fire, I mean. And I do not recover the Rhyme Hauberk, which is unfortunate. But Marignon basically just loses that item for free. In Man, Man actually tries to break the siege with a couple of these spearmen. So this was a mistake on his part because if TNG had just left one guy with no commander to hold the fort, then just sending the solo commander by himself would have been enough to break, or this Bakemono chief, whichever he preferred. Whereas having a whole bunch of given that TNG actually did leave his army of a whole bunch of these heavy cavalry guys, he's basically just losing all these spearmen for free. So they wouldn't have really helped against the solo unit, and they also wouldn't have, I mean, obviously they just kind of die for free to this many guys. He could have tried breaking with just the Ghost King. With Stoneskin, the Ghost King actually has a decent protection in order to go along with his Fear Aura and Awe. Unfortunately, because he brought all the spearmen, he suffers from HP rout. So, yeah, these spearmen definitely didn't help. He just, threw away guys who were helping keep his walls up. And, yeah, it also ensured that his Ghost King didn't get a chance to fight. Which could have been good, because, he could have lost it for free there as well, but, yeah. Here we see Ulm taking a province just past Darkocephaly. So it looks like these guys are basically just slipping past each other rather than fighting each other directly. So they're just trading provinces on their borders, which is nice for me because it means that war is going to go on for a fair bit longer. I find some magic sites. So Bone Door Tower is just another Death Gem site. The Painted Cave is just another Astral site. And the Hidden Gold Mine is a gold site, so this is going to be providing me additional income here. Given that this was a low population province, this income boost is definitely nice, and the additional income from this is also improved by administration, so once I build a fort here, that income is going to go up even higher. I'm sending this guy back, and he's going to go collect these crossbowmen who had routed when he had taken this province here. And then, because it's still going to be winter for a bit, he can loop around through here, group up with these guys, and then take on this fort. I'm going to leave most of the guys here sieging it for now. That's going to help possibly break down the walls, because I do want to kill the guys who are inside of this fort. Right now they can't get out and hurt me, and I can also leave just one guy there to hold the fort in place. But if I move too many guys away and I don't have enough guys here in order to beat them, then once he does break siege and basically breaks out of this castle, then I'll potentially have to deal with either a large number of raiding parties moving through here, or just one large group that I won't necessarily have the forces to handle. So until I can put together a second army in order to handle it, I don't want to move these guys here onto the capital directly. I am, however, going to send over the small mercenary company over here to capture this province, and I'm going to send a small group of blind fighters led by an alchemist here to capture this one. My scout here sees that it's only one PD, or between 1 and 3 PD, so unless Marignon pumps it up, there's no reason to expect this to go wrong, and even if he does, even unblessed blind fighters are pretty good against PD, as we saw when they were fighting Indies. I'm going to start moving these Ichthyids over here, given that I've got 33 of them, that's enough to do some raiding. And I'm moving this Triton stack over here as well to help patrol down this province, because any little bit of unrest that I get is just reducing my income, so I may as well patrol it away once I'm not doing anything else. Otherwise, I'm basically just building up infrastructure here, so I've got my castle going up. This guy here is building a castle just because no one else is available to do it. I'm moving over a scout now to basically take over that for him. And then he'll also be able to site search this province, then build a temple, then build a lab. I do want more temples here to keep pressing my dominion outwards. If I am going to be fighting Pythium, fighting in friendly dominion is helpful just for the morale bonus. And the reason that I build a temple before building a lab is that I don't have any indie mages to recruit, and the temple is going to start producing Dominion checks, even if it doesn't have a fort on top of it. My research is going to let me hit Conjuration 3 next turn. I accidentally left a little bit here in enchantment, but you know, it's not the end of the world. I just waste a couple RP there. But I'll get to enchantment eventually, so eventually I'll be able to use those points as well. And yeah, Gath here is not really doing anything as far as I can tell. He's basically just futzing around his border with TNG. And given that I have Marignon's army suppressed in here, I can just go ahead and start taking some of his provinces. And that's the turn. Alright, this is turn 22 of I equipped my heavy crossbow. I found Gallows, another death gem site. The Ferran Mountains, which is the province here, didn't have any province defense. And this one here was taken quite easily with the blind fighters just doing their blind fighting thing. The Cave of Madness here gets retaken by Man's Ghost King Pretender working on his own. Since he's stealthy, he can sneak out of the sieged fort. There was a deathmatch in the arena. Unfortunately, I sent the wrong Blind Lord. So within my army, I had 2 heroic Blind Lords. One of them had improved HP, and the other one had improved strength. Improved HP is very helpful, especially with an N9 Bless, because it means that even with a human-sized chassis, he still actually has enough HP for his regen to matter. Given that I had an extra Blind Lord that wasn't necessary to lead an army, they're great contestants to send into the arena, since with the Self-Bless, they have regeneration and reinvigoration and so on. This early in the game, the only thing I would potentially be worried about is spellcasters, and most people don't like risking them in arena fights because they don't necessarily even want to use the arena artifacts. For whatever reason, I think I set him to hold behind troops because I didn't bother adjusting his script or anything. So he just waits there until this guy gets bored of shooting arrows at him. And then once they're in melee, the fact that he has such high defense and protection means that he easily wins the duel. And he gets the Champion Cuirass. Yes, that's going to give him quickness and awe and luck. So definitely a great thug item. Oh, and even a little bit of extra regeneration. If it had gone on to Space Goat here, he would have had a lot more HP in order to take advantage of those improved stats. But as he is still not totally useless. I see that Marignon has moved his army off of his capital here, so as expected, he is responding. I'm going to be sending these guys over here to cut them off. Marignon's army here, because he seems to be using his Inquisitors as leaders instead of his sailing commanders, are fairly immobile, especially since I already own some of these provinces here. So, the reason that I moved out here to intercept is that my expectation, given his apparent propensity for deathballing, is that he's going to move this army here, then try to break this, try to lift the siege here, and break siege at the same time. Or at least that's what I thought that he was going to be doing at the time. So if I'm right, I get to intercept his army and then kill it with my big old blob taking on this smaller group, and then I can move right back onto the fortress. I'm not actually expecting him to break siege here. Here, the small group of blind fighters is then going to go on and capture this province. And, yeah, these guys are, or these scouts over here are basically just moving along this border to see what's going on with the fight over there. And he's staying put onto here in order to see what's happening with that siege. This guy has gathered up the crossbowmen and is moving over here. And we're scouting this board over here just to see what's going on in the southern end of Pythium's empire. Pythium retook this province, which he had lost to Indies, but because he'd moved his Hydras up through here, I hadn't seen them coming, so I kind of freaked out, like, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of Hydras on my border, so I moved the Ichthyids back in towards here. The reason that I did that, the excuse that I'm giving is that I'm picking up these guys in order to round out this group of 33, and be like, oh, you know, now I've got the full 40, so it's great. But this also means that if he does attack me by moving this group of Hydras up to here, and then starts threatening to push into here, then I'll be able to start raiding over here. So while this group of Ichthyids definitely can't beat anything important that Pythium can field, it can harass his provinces if he's not able to correctly guess which province I'm attacking. And then, of course, I'm continuing to keep scouts along this border with Pythium just to keep a better eye of what he's up to. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm casting a bunch of Awakened Shard Wights. Without buff spells for them, I like Shard Wights over penumbrals, with certain exceptions like fort sieging and other stuff where the ethereal or stealth abilities could come into play. Without any of that on my side, with just the base units, Shardwights are better because they have decent base protection. So yeah, I'm basically summoning up these guys to have just soldiers available as a counter answer to Pythium's forces. If he sends small groups in order to attack more provinces at once, I can respond. And if he doesn't, if he balls up, then I can use them as raiding parties in their own right, led by my own efficient death mages. Aside from that, it's just more site-searching stuff going on over here. And until these guys get over here, I don't want to actually use these guys to take on this throne on their own. But these guys are definitely going to be, in my opinion, more than enough to take on this throne province. We already saw Pythium take on a similar throne with less, so I'm building only mages here, because I don't want to be paying the upkeep on more troops that I don't plan on using in the short term, and because of the resource settings in the game, I can quickly amass an army even without production scales. So there's only one new Marignon province being attacked. That's this one over here. Quite well organized. I'm expecting that to be just 6 PD, so nothing that 6 elite units can't handle. And yeah, that's the turn. Oh yeah, up here we see Ulm and Archocephaly still just exchanging provinces. No real big battles there yet that I actually saw. We have a misfortune event on Agartha that provides yet more misfortune, as can be expected. And we get to rip off a peddler and acquire some almost free gems. So my luck continues to be good in spite of my misfortune scales. And that's the turn. This is turn 23 of I equipped my heavy crossbow. I recruited a bunch of these Shardwights, and I find a bunch of magic sites. So here I got the Temple of Darkness. This is actually a site that I am going to use, unlike that ghoul site where I would only want a throwaway mage to do it. This one produces a Shade and a Shadow Soldier. The Shadow Soldier is unimpressive. It's just because it has a MR negates paralyze attack, so you can't actually hurt things very well. But Shades are pretty decent. They have an actual magic attack that deals direct damage. And yeah, you get both of them at once when you enter the site, so it produces a reasonable amount of ethereal chaff without paying any gems or anything for them. So I want to bring over a cheaper mage so that this, really important guy isn't stuck doing it. But because I have 3 turns until this castle is left and I don't really need him elsewhere just yet, since I do still need to build the lab and temple here, I can just leave him doing that. This castle, since it's finishing in 2 turns, needs a mage of its own, so I'm moving this guy down over here. Oh yeah, other magic sites. So I find Caverns of Glowing Moss and Order of the Undying. So this one would let me send in a priest to summon Long Dead Horsemen, and I actually do like Long Dead Horsemen. This is kind of like having a reanimator for undead that I would actually want to reanimate. And Caverns of Glowing Moss gives me some extra fire gems, which is nice. I see his group here actually went through Pythium in order to flank me, so he outguessed me in this case. I'm going to be moving this army back onto the fort here in case he does try to break siege. And I actually anticipated that he's still going to try to deathball and that he was basically just trying to loop around this way in order to do it. So I sent my intercept team, my guys who, bolstered by these Shardwights here, are bringing in a bunch of Sacreds. This mercenary company and some crossbows are going to try to intercept that army, and then they should be able to handle it without any trouble. So having reached Conjuration 3, I can actually summon lesser fire elementals. And I do so here on the southern end of my army, and I leave kind of a corridor for them here. So the idea is that the elementals aren't going to get stuck behind my troop lines and start burning them with their heat auras, but they're also not going to put my mages in danger as they would if I wanted to put my mage on the front line. So when using fire elementals, or even elementals of any other type, or even skeleton spam, because you generally want your battlefield summons to get to the front line first, to get to the front line and not get stuck behind your troops, you want to leave some sort of corridor for them to get through. With fire elementals, you don't want to put them here or a similar place where friendly units might advance and hang out nearby, because they have a heat aura which can fatigue and even burn my own units. These guys here similarly have this chill aura, which is really effective if they get stuck in against low damage infantry, but can also be very effective against my own guys. So I want to make sure that the Shard Wights are not standing next to my blind fighters, because even though they are going to get reinvigoration, with their high encumbrance, the effect from the chill aura can very quickly make them much less effective. So I separate these guys out, and attack archers is essentially a more reliable attack rear if your opponent is not expecting it and adjusting their own scripting and positioning accordingly. These archers here are set further back, and they're kept in a skirmish formation. Given that it's a relatively small number, I don't lose all too much firepower by keeping them in skirmish formation. These guys are set a little bit further forward because I want them to be the ones to draw fire if the enemy is set to fire archers. The reason for that is both because they're a mercenary group and therefore fundamentally expendable, and also because they have these plate hauberks which give them a much better protection score than my own light crossbowmen. I was basically hoping that he would hit here. In this province, I basically just have some sight searchers, but they're set to retreat, so in case I'm wrong and he does attack this province, I at least don't lose any valuable mages. Meanwhile, this guy here is essentially functioning as a mini-thug. Since he has all these awesome attack stats on account of his quickness, the additional luck, and the awe, he has some extra layers of mitigation which make him very resilient against enemy province defense, so I feel comfortable sending him in on his own. Over here, because Pythium didn't move his serpents or his hydras up this way, I'm not particularly worried about an attack from him anymore, and he basically reassured me that everything was good, so I'm picking up some extra Ichthyids and sending this group of 40 over this way. And I'm still not totally trusting him, though, so instead of sending them through here, I'm sending them down onto this side so that if I do get betrayed and attacked from over here, then I can at least raid one of these provinces, and if Pythium doesn't guess correctly, I can then send the raiding party further into his territory. So it basically provides me a chance to hit back, whereas sending them over here would not, and since I'm going to be sending them over here next anyways to attack this province, it doesn't actually take any longer than going through this central water province. Oh yeah, last turn Pythium endorsed the Serpent Cult, which means he's going to be able to make additional hydras out of all of his forts. The other thing that I did when going to or preparing for war with Pythium, which I didn't mention last turn, is I assigned fire gems to most of my research mages near the border with Pythium here. The reason that I did that is that with Conjuration 3, they're going to be able to summon lesser fire elementals, and even assassins with skull talismans will often lose even to the smaller size fire elementals because the skeletons will kill themselves on the fire elemental shield, and they have a 3/4 chance of not even doing any damage while they're doing that. And then the fire elemental will then be able to advance forward and light up the assassin. So with those guys being at least a little bit better secured, I can basically feel safer about Pythium's potential for assassination. I don't expect him to be sending his assassins all the way over here, but I leave some fire gems on these guys just in case. And the guys who are going over here are summoning fire elementals anyway, so, you know, they have to have fire gems of their own as well. This guy here, because he has no fire magic, I leave some fire gems on him. He's, of course, a very resilient commander, so I'm not worried about him dying. Normally you want a scout to do that, but since I haven't been building as many scouts as I should have, I don't have a whole bunch spare in order to help carry the gems for my guys, so I'm leaving them on this guy instead in order to make sure that I have extra gems for that army, for if I do catch it here, I can continue pushing into Marignan, and I'll still have those fire gems available. And that's the turn. Alright, this is turn 24 of I equipped my heavy crossbow. Here I was actually outguessed by Marignan, so he attacked this province here instead of this one where I moved my army to intercept his. So luckily my mages were set to retreat, or not luckily, I at least took the precaution of setting them to retreat so I didn't lose them or anything. But my province defense is definitely not holding up to like an actual army with a front line and a bunch of crossbowmen. So that happens. Here in the Mountains of Mist, my Blind Lord Mini-Thug is able to successfully capture this province. I set the PD here to 2 rather than 1 in order to get a heavy infantry guy, but it almost certainly won't actually make any difference. I'm summoning yet more Shardwights and Penumbrals. The Penumbrals I'm starting to summon now mostly to help with my eventual fort sieges. Ethereal units can go through walls, which means that they're going to be able to flank the army of the defenders and not get stuck up on the gate along with my other infantry units. The claiming of the Throne of Night is something that can potentially help me because it's going to cause a worldwide darkness event. When that occurs, because many of my guys have dark vision, they're going to have an advantage in the battles over the next couple of turns. I find another magic site. This is just a one death gem site. And then here we see an actual interesting battle. Archocephaly appears to have a lot more guys here. At least he has more crossbowmen than Olm does. But he actually loses this battle quite handily. So let's go ahead and take a look and I'll show you why. So the first thing to note here is that the army is set up in like towards the center of the field, with the elephants set up in one squad along the flank. This means that when the elephants retreat, if they don't retreat very, very quickly, then they're going to retreat back over his own army. The second thing that you can see is that Olm's front line is arranged all along this wide front over here, whereas Archocephaly's army is set up in multiple rows. So he's got like this box here, which has like a second row behind it, and then he has these militia over here set to one side. So in addition to having inferior frontline units, because the infantry of Olm, with their decent protection and so on, are just sturdier than the guys they're fighting, he's also going to have a larger surface area once the armies clash. And the second thing to note about the formation is that Archocephaly's crossbowmen are in a box formation, whereas Olm's are set in a skirmish formation. So it appears as though those guys are set to fire archers naturally, and they hit this square here, and pretty much all the crossbow bolts hit. Part of that is the fact that rangers have higher than normal precision, so base precision of 12, and many of these guys are also experienced, which improves that further. But it's also the case that because they're aiming at like the center of a large box, even the ones that didn't necessarily hit the square that they were targeted at are still going to do damage to the squad. When Archocephaly shoots back, as you can see, many of the crossbow bolts are still, hitting the square while the rangers are set up, but many of them are also hitting these empty squares, which the skirmish formation imposes. Another thing worth noting is that the Cyclops, because he's coming from enemy dominion, and he's still attacking into enemy dominion, has a large dominion penalty to his hit points. Which, he's set to only 15 HP, which means that if he actually gets into battle, even with a bunch of buffs and his incredibly high protection, and a Fear Aura to help make enemies run away more quickly, he's still liable to get scratched up. As we saw there, Olm actually did get first hit on man among his many advantages. The elephants actually moved up almost into range, but didn't have enough AP left to actually trample. Because this elephant squad has only 3 elephants, so they don't have any squad filler, like any extra militia added to them or whatever, they take a morale check without any of them even taking a significant amount of damage, which means that they rout right away. And in a sense, this is potentially lucky for Arco, because it means that they're not going to rout over his own guys. Oh yeah, they do run over the Cyclops, who is only a mere size 5, so luckily he's got Mist Form and High Protection and an okay defense score, so he doesn't get actually like squished, because he could have died there. There's definitely a chance of that. This crossbow squad here, because crossbows have low base morale and are fighting in hostile dominion, even with a slight advantage from their squad, they do rout fairly quickly. So as we saw, Olm's wider line here meant that he was able to essentially get the surround on Archocephaly's squad. These guys here are not hitting anything, whereas as many of Olm's guys as possible are. And then with this squad of crossbows routed, a majority of Archocephaly's firepower is gone as well, whereas these rangers are free to keep shooting. Something worth noting is that because this squad of crossbows routed, the fire archers command is essentially no longer in effect. So when you do a targeted fire like fire archers, fire cavalry, and so on, it's going to pick one squad, and then once that squad routes, they're basically just going to default to a regular fire command where they're going to just pick from whatever targets they have in range. So yeah, they're firing on the infantry now, and they do cause a little bit of friendly fire, but because these guys are heavily armored and have tower shields, even the crossbow bolts which land on friendly units are less damaging than the ones landing on the enemy army. And that's essentially the end for Arcocephaly. His armies are now routed. Luckily for him, these units are at least rather slow, so they're not going to be able to chase down many of the retreating units. And that's the battle. So in spite of bringing more firepower, a combination of scripting and unit quality means that Ulm actually comes out ahead. This is his prophet, by the way, so that was who was casting his might and so on. The one downside that Ulm has is that because he has only one commander, he can't actually split this army up. So even if Arcocephaly doesn't have sufficient defenders in order to actually cover these provinces here, Ulm isn't going to be able to take all of them back with just this squad. Or just this army. I mean, he's going to need more guys in order to... He's going to need to bring new guys up in order to actually do that. He can continue to use it as like a... I guess you can call it a death ball, even though it's lacking in the mage support department. But he can still, like, send it to take on some reinforced provinces and chase down Arcocephaly's troops. So here I'm predicting, because he took this province here instead of this one, he's probably going to sneak around over here. So I'm going to send another response team, namely these guys over here. This one doesn't have crossbows, but it does have, or it's going to have a couple of crossbows from these indies here, but it does have like an extremely resilient melee front line, including a bunch of these shard whites, a bunch of my sacreds, and so on. They should be able to survive the enemy crossbow fire fairly well, close, and then win the melee fight. And I'm sending it over here because it's essentially going to be able to respond to Arcocephaly's army, or have a chance to respond to Arcocephaly's army regardless of where he moves it. So I'm sending a small group over here. This guy here is just going to summon one Earth Elemental. And I'm sending him with a couple blind fighters there just in order to take on the province defense, because I don't expect him to actually go for this fort. Here I'm leaving nothing. I have a little bit of province defense from earlier, but I expect him to just run that over without any issue. Meanwhile, this team, which was the initial response team for this army, is going to move down here. So they're actually going to be marching onto Marignon's capital. Depending on what Marignon has, I think that they can actually take on the capital province defense and what little mage support he has. Given that he has only one fort producing mages, even though he has much better scales than I do for research with these Magic 3 scales, I expect that I'm actually significantly ahead of him. And because research is set on difficult, he's probably not, even at anything with level 3. So I don't expect his mage support to be making the difference in this fight here. I'm still keeping a watchful eye on Pythium, but I'm no longer worried about him attacking me directly. So as a result of that, I've put a pause on my additional Shardwhite production for now, and I feel comfortable using this army to respond to Marignon instead of being on hand to respond to Pythium. Over here, it looks like Gat is still just kind of not really doing anything. He just moved away from the border with Tianchi here. So it seems like many of the other players in this game are actually fairly timid in terms of what they're willing to do. So Pythium hasn't attacked me yet. He's moving this army down over here, or this little sacred stack. So I anticipate that he's going to have these on the border with Joman shortly. I talked to Joman a little bit. He was worried about the army over here, even though I told him explicitly what I was doing with it, which, he has a right to be, so he responded with this big old blob of archers and such. But I talked to Joman about anti-Hydra tactics and told him Pythium's Bless, so that if he does need to respond to Pythium moving up over here, that he'll be able to have some, or he started rushing Conjuration City, can have some fire mages help deal with that. And that's the turn. This is turn 25 of I equipped my heavy crossbow, and we finally have some action. So I was correct, this time at least, about where Marignon is moving. So I moved the stuff that could have been hurt out of the way, and now I just need to predict where he's moving these guys. Because I was right last time and I can see that he's sidling along over here, I expect him to move to this province over here, so that's where I'm sending my interception team, now bolstered by some additional mercenaries. So these guys have two little lanes where they're summoning fire elementals. One here at the top to move alongside the mercenaries, and then one here at the bottom. With these guys being set to hold and attack archers, I'm expecting them to basically be moving backwards and then down, whereas the fire elemental is going to be moving this way, and because by default they're going to chase the closest units, they're going to basically be moving forward this way and then down over here. So while they'll potentially be upsetting my blind fighters a little bit with the heat aura, just one isn't going to make a huge difference, whereas the flame burst attack from the fire elemental can potentially do a fair bit. And then a similar thing is going to be happening here on the southern end of my army. These guys here with their cold auras are also going to be set to hold an attack. And then I'm putting the penumbrals here in front of them because they're cold resistant on account of their being undead. So all of these guys here should be able to move together towards the back. These guys are set to hold and attack large monsters in case Pythium is actually attacking me. I see that Pythium is continuing his Hydra production here on my border, which isn't super surprising given that he endorsed the Hydra cult in order to make more Hydras, so naturally he's going to be doing that. Here, I actually lost my Thug. So Marignon got very, very lucky from an event. He managed to get a Ring of Wizardry. So this is an item that takes a very high astral level, usually a pretender, designed in order to make this item and cast astral globals. It provides a bonus of 1 to every single magic path, and it costs a huge amount of astral pearls. So this is an incredibly valuable item. It's better than most artifacts in the game, and well, he's very desperate here, so he's basically using it in order to reduce the fatigue cost of this guy casting Mind Burn. But, I mean, if that's all he has, then that's what he has to use. So, my guy here was set to hold and attack after blessing himself, with the idea being that he has a lower chance to get hit by archers when he's further away from them. But unfortunately, it's the incorrect move when fighting against a Mind Burn spamming mage. His magic resistance is okay. It's only 12 on account of the magic scale from his base 13. So given that ties go in the favor of the offensive mage, he's going to have a roughly 50% chance, or slightly less than 50% chance, of getting Mind Burned and taking damage each time that mage casts the spell. Because he has lucky, he also has a 3/4 chance of avoiding any fatal attack, which includes Mind Burn. Because Mind Burn isn't Soul Slay, it's just doing direct damage. If the Mind Burn would kill him, he has a chance of surviving it anyways. With his regeneration, he's also recovering a fair bit each round. With his Awe, most of these guys aren't doing damage to him. And with his quickness, he's able to chop through them fairly quickly, but he is building up fatigue by doing this on account of his very high encumbrance. So here you can see why this is so risky. So while the province defense is routed, province defense and main armies actually have different, or are like separate for the purposes of HP route. So this guy is not running away in spite of the fact that all of his front line is. And he fatigued himself with his Mind Burn casts, which means that if he doesn't succeed on some very lucky Mind Burns in the near future, he's going to die and potentially lose, or he's for sure going to lose that Ring of Wizardry, and potentially he's even going to be giving that to me. Luckily for him, he succeeds in a very lucky Mind Burn. He does an unusual amount of damage, as you saw that was 16 damage there. And, yeah, he doesn't, or the luck effect on that guy, which provided him a 75% chance of surviving that, does not go through. So he took a gamble and he won. Here, Marignon also moved out his army from the capital, which I had mentioned that I wasn't expecting him to do. And because he's still using his High Inquisitor to lead it, or, yeah, these guys because of their high leadership. I don't like using these guys as Ele Marignon unless I need the throne claiming ability, because they can't sail, so he's stuck moving these guys just, one space at a time. Whereas usually Marignon is capable of getting around the fact that these guys are map move 1 by using sailing commanders. This is just the mercenary company that was all at the front set to attack. So while they do get to kill a couple of crossbowmen, they get chopped up and shot up. Here, my big ol' army takes this army which just had province defense, and I'm moving it over here in order to then march on Marignon's capital. I'm not really sure where he plans on moving this army, since last time he saw me move my army off to intercept. In this case, I've got these guys blocking off this route. My guess was actually that he was going to predict that I was going to move this army off, and then he was going to try to break siege here. So I'm going to leave this army here with the intention of actually taking on his army when he tries to break siege, because the guys in here are still the majority of Marignon's forces. So I might be wrong, he might move up here, and the mage being sent here is just scripted to retreat, so I'm not going to lose him if he does do that. This province here, I just lost to this unlucky event. People have revolted and you've lost control. Since I didn't set, that's an event that happens when you've got misfortune and not a lot of PD. So yeah, I'm just going to retake that with these guys right here. In this province here, that was, which one was that? This guy, yeah. So the blind fighters just took on a small amount of PD and, no problems. Here, I got free province defense in this water province, so that's nice. That's going to help provide 1 additional unrest reduction. Otherwise, it's not a huge deal. I definitely wouldn't have spent money on that by choice, but, free is a good price to pay for PD. Here, I lost a group of freethinkers on account of the Order Misfortune scales. So that's going to reduce the population by a little bit, and therefore reduce the province income. Here we see another interesting battle. So this is, again, Arcocephaly fighting Ulm, and again, Arcocephaly has more stuff. This time he has a lot more stuff. His guys are set to cast Body Ethereal. That might be unscripted, that might be in order to make Body Ethereal elephants. Unfortunately, he did not put the mystics next to the elephants, so he's just casting Body Ethereal on a bunch of random troops, and the elephants are sitting behind his guys. He intelligently did divide the elephants into different squads. This means that one routing isn't going to make all of them rout, so each elephant is going to need to get poked by a stick a little bit in order to run away. He's also using actually better units this time, and he's creating one line in order to get a little bit more surface area. Unfortunately, he still has some serious problems with his formation. So, one, his front line is still just much too small. When it gets enveloped by Ulms, then that's going to pose issues. Secondly, his archers are still set into boxes rather than skirmish formation. And third, he has his mages and commanders all in with his archers. So if he gets unlucky and Ulm targets this squad of archers, which is admittedly a little bit unlikely because they're a little bit further back, but it's still possible. So if that happens, then he's at risk of having his commanders get sniped out, which would mean that he would lose the fight even if he was otherwise capable of winning. So while Body Ethereal does help make that a little bit less likely, since Ethereal means that it's going to have a 3/4 chance of not getting hit by non-magic crossbow bolts, it's still just a pointless risk to take. You want your commanders to be removed from your archer squad and set further back, like this guy's got his right there. This time Arcocephaly is the defender, so he does get first shot, which is going to reduce the rangers shooting at him by a little bit, and he also gets lucky in that this squad did not get picked. But since these guys are all boxed up, they are still taking full damage from every crossbow volley. So in this case, Arcocephaly has like almost 3 times as many crossbowmen as Ulm or something. I don't remember the exact number, but he has like a lot more. So he is actually reducing the number of rangers here by a lot. Luckily for Ulm, these rangers have very high morale. So they're actually going to be staying in the fight and continuing to shoot even when they are getting whittled down. And as a result, they're going to be sniping down these crossbowmen who do not have very high morale. So here Arcocephaly's elephants actually do get a chance to do some damage, so good on him. But his troops are still surrounded, so while the elephant does break the line here, which is very helpful, he still does have these extra squads hitting him on account of the fact that he just has fewer melee guys in the fight. So it's worth noting that while this elephant did get surrounded and killed, and this elephant did get routed by being poked a little bit on account of his low morale and being lonely in the squad, this elephant here is free to continue trampling, and as we saw, these elephants are very effective against the heavily armored infantry. Unfortunately, the rest of his front line just does not hold up to being surrounded, so many of these guys routed, and many of the rest are just being killed. So he loses that elephant there, and while he did manage to take out a large chunk of these rangers here, he now has infantry coming up on his crossbow squad, and naturally they're not very good at fighting in melee. So once these guys break, the armies of Arcocephaly are routed. However, when you look at the losses, just because Arcocephaly had brought so much more firepower than Ulm, like almost 3 times as many crossbows, these additional elephants for trampling through the heavily armored infantry, he's actually able to make a favorable trade, or at least an equivalent trade, I'd say, given how expensive these elephants are. And that's definitely in his favor, since, as mentioned earlier, he's just a much bigger nation, so he can afford to make trades like this, and he's actually coming out ahead. If Ulm had managed to bring more commanders here, then he would actually be able to take advantage of the fact that he broke into Arcocephaly's territory and split up his army, send little groups of 15 infantries of Ulm to hit each of these provinces, and then potentially cause Arcocephaly some serious trouble if he's not able to similarly respond to troop splitting. By having only one commander here, he's much more limited in his options. This block of troops right here has lost most of its rangers, so they definitely can't take on an army from Arcocephaly of that size again. So he might need to pull back to get reinforcements. I don't see what all Ulm has, but he definitely doesn't want to risk diving further into Arcocephaly's territory, because if he does, Arcocephaly is almost certainly going to retake this province, and then if his army does lose a fight, he's not going to have anywhere to retreat to, so it could cause potentially devastating losses. And then, yeah, if he's able to guess correctly, it might be worth just carving a swath through Arcocephaly and being annoying by doing that. But because he has such a large number of troops with only one commander, it's relatively inexpensive for Arcocephaly to respond to that, because he doesn't need to be able to beat that army in order to retake the provinces that that army causes. Or, yeah, the provinces that that army takes. So essentially he's able to answer it for a lower price than the offensive force here. So I think I'd already mentioned this here, that I expect him to go along this way, so I'm cutting that off. Here I'm once again just using a minimal group in order to retake this province over here, since I don't expect that army to stick around. And I am, yeah, just recruiting dudes, retaking this one with a small number of sacreds and crossbows, and then these sacreds can then be passed along to the Blind Lord there. And then this guy here is going to be able to go back to researching or doing mate supporting and so on. My amphibious squad is going to be able to take on this over here. The trick that he pulled with the mind melter dude over here is definitely not going to be able to work against a large number of units because it's just a single target spell. So even though these guys have much lower morale or magic resistance with only 8 base, so 7 in enemy dominion, there's also just a lot more of them. So even if he's succeeding every time, burning each of them one at a time, it's just too many guys. He's not going to be able to go through all 40 of them. And yeah, that is turn 25. Ulm is making a good showing against Arcocephaly, although Arcocephaly's superior resources do mean that he is battering Ulm backwards. And as you can see here, he's even managed to raid, most likely with the amphibious army with which he took this lake right over here. And that's the turn.